On Christmas Eve, I offered my family my entire life savings, $15,000, to save our home. My brother just laughed and threw it back at me. "Your money is as soulless as you are," he sneered. But it was my own mother who delivered the killing blow, whispering that my success was putting my father in his grave. They didn't know that the ghost they created that night would come back to haunt them, not with chains, but with a checkbook. My name is Nellie Jules, and I was 29 on the Christmas Eve my world shattered. The scent of failure had its own unique perfume. In my family's bookstore, Jules & Sons, it was a suffocating blend of mildew, decaying paper, and the stale, defeated air of a place that had already died but hadn't yet been buried. I'd just come home to Cambridge for the holidays, back from the demanding world of MIT, and the familiar comfort I craved was gone. In its place, pinned to the old cork bulletin board, was a horrifying splash of pink, a foreclosure notice. The words swam before my eyes, each one a nail in our coffin. My heart constricted, a tight, painful knot in my chest. Across the room, my father, Arthur, the true soul of this bookstore, sat motionless in his wheelchair. His gaze was vacant, lost in a fog of illness and despair that had stolen the light from his eyes. He was the reason I was here. He was the reason I had to try. With a fragile flicker of hope, I pulled a small, worn passbook from my purse. Bank of America. It felt impossibly heavy. "I have $15,000, I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady. I held it out, an offering. "It's everything. Everything I've saved from tutoring and freelance coding jobs." I looked from my brother, Dashiell, to my mother, Cordelia, my eyes pleading for them to see the solution, not the problem. "We can use it. It'll cover the immediate debt, and I can build an online sales system for the store. I know how. I can do this. We can do this." I was desperate for a sign of unity, a shared glance that said we were a family, fighting together. I received a laugh instead. It was a dry, bitter, ugly sound that scraped the silence from the air. Dashiell, my older brother at 33, the failed artist clinging to the bookstore's legacy as an excuse for his own stagnation, snatched the passbook from my hand. He didn't look at it. He just flung it onto the dusty coffee table, where it landed with a soft, pathetic thud. $15,000, he sneered, his voice dripping with a contempt he didn't bother to hide. "Who do you think you are, the savior? You think you can waltz in here and buy the soul of this place with dirty money from your soulless machine world?" He took a step toward me, his shadow falling over me. This place was built on literature, on passion, on a human touch, not on your damned algorithms. Your money is just as soulless as you are, Nellie. His words were like shards of ice, embedding themselves not just in the cold air, but in my skin. Even the silent, leather-bound books on the shelves seemed to recoil. He wasn't done. He took another step and gave my shoulder a light shove. It wasn't violent, but it was thick with disgust, a physical dismissal. I stumbled back, the sting of his push less painful than the sting of his words. Wounded, my gaze shot to my mother, Cordelia. She stood by the unlit fireplace, her posture elegant and rigid. She was my last fortress, the final wall of defense I believed would always stand for me. But the fortress had already fallen. She looked at me, her eyes not angry, but filled with a cold, devastating disappointment, as if I were the one who had failed. She moved, but not toward me. She walked directly to Dashiell, her favored child, her brilliant, sensitive artist. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, a gesture of solidarity, of choosing a side. And then she leaned in and spoke a sentence meant only for me to hear. It wasn't a shout, it was a whisper, more poisonous and deadly than any scream. "Don't you see, Nellie?" she murmured, her breath a cold fog of betrayal. "All this stress, your ambition, your success is what's killing your father." The words struck me silent, paralyzed me where I stood. And then came the final killing blow. After delivering her verdict, she turned her back to me completely. Her hands, so steady and sure, moved to her son's throat, not to choke him, but to tenderly, lovingly adjust his expensive cashmere scarf. A small domestic act of affection that sealed my exile. In that moment, I wasn't just outside the family circle. I had ceased to exist. My world didn't just crack, it atomized. There were no tears. There was only a hollow, ringing void, a coldness that seeped into my bones, more brutal than the nor'easter that had begun to howl outside the windows. I moved like an automaton. My body felt disconnected from my mind as I pulled on my coat and picked up my handbag. The passbook lay forgotten on the table. As the heavy oak door creaked shut behind me, I heard Dashiell's final decree. "Go and don't ever come back." I stood on the snow-covered Cambridge street, the world a canvas of blinding white. The warm yellow lights glowing from the windows of other houses felt like a personal mockery, each one a portrait of a family I would never have. The wind whipped my hair across my face, biting at my exposed skin. I pulled my collar tighter, the cold a welcome distraction from the inferno of shock inside me. And in the swirling snow, I whispered a promise to myself, my breath turning to frost in the air. "I won't come back," I vowed to the unforgiving night, "but I will make you beg me to." My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, past Mom, past Dashiell, until I found the only name that still meant family. The only person left. I pressed the button to call Chloe. In the warmth of Chloe's MIT dorm room, I was curled in a nest of blankets, a steaming mug of hot chocolate cradled in my hands. Chloe, my roommate and chosen family, had made it for me, but its sweetness couldn't touch the frozen core inside me. The chill wasn't from the Boston winter raging outside the window. It was a cold that had been seeping into my bones for years. Staring into the darkness, my mind drifted back, searching for the origins of that cold, tracing the map of my scars. My thoughts first found my father, Arthur, and a warmth spread through my chest, fragile but real. I remembered him closing the bookstore early on a Tuesday, a conspiratorial wink in my direction, just to take me to the Boston Museum of Science. I could still feel the awe as my eyes, wide with wonder, traced the gears and levers of the complex machines. He was the only one who didn't see my fascination as strange. When I assembled my first computer from discarded parts, he beamed, calling me his little inventor. I found a worn copy of a book about Ada Lovelace, the world's first programmer, tucked under my pillow one night. My father had bought it from another bookstore, hiding it from my mother, who would have deemed it unsuitable. Tucked inside was a small handwritten note, for my poet of numbers. The memory was so clear, so warm. He was my only ally. When I won my first programming award in high school, he whispered in my ear, his voice thick with pride, "Don't ever let anyone tell you that numbers can't tell stories, Nellie. They tell the grandest stories of all." A sigh escaped my lips, the warmth of the memory instantly chilled by another, my 17th birthday. My father had saved up to buy me a magnificent, expensive telescope. I was ecstatic, spending hours gazing at the moon's craters. But at my small birthday party, my brother Dashiell, then struggling his way through art school, had remarked loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, looking at dead stars? What a lonely hobby." The comment was designed to sting, to isolate. Later that night, as I was carefully polishing the telescope's lens, he accidentally stumbled, sending a full glass of Coca-Cola splashing across the delicate optics. It was a sticky, ruinous mess. I cried out, a mix of shock and anger. But my mother, Cordelia, didn't get angry at Dashiell. She just sighed, a long, weary sound of inconvenience. "Come on, you two," she said, her tone dismissive. "It's just a thing. Dashiell, you need to be more careful. Nellie, don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." Her words were a quiet, firm slap. My hurt was an inconvenience. Dashiell's carelessness was a minor flaw. The favoritism was so blatant, so sharp, it left a mark I could still feel. The pattern repeated, becoming more refined, more insidious. The day my acceptance letter from MIT arrived, offering a full scholarship, my father wrapped me in a hug right in the middle of the bookstore and wept with pride. We went out to celebrate at a cozy Italian restaurant in the North End. But the evening wasn't about my achievement. My mother steered the entire conversation toward my brother. "Dashiell has such a sensitive, artistic soul," Cordelia announced to the table, her voice laced with concern. "He needs his family around him to keep him from getting lost." The message was crystal clear. Nellie is strong. She can take care of herself. Dashiell is fragile. He must be protected at all costs. My joy curdled into a heavy, suffocating guilt. It felt as though my success wasn't a triumph, but a burden on the family's delicate peace, a spotlight that exposed my brother's shadows. Huddled in Chloe's room, the hot chocolate now cold in my hands, I finally understood. The betrayal on Christmas Eve wasn't a beginning, it was a culmination. In the eyes of my mother and brother, the family legacy wasn't knowledge or love, or even the stories held within the books. It was the brick-and-mortar prison of Jules and Sons, the dusty shelves and the peeling paint. It was their monument to stagnation. And I, by daring to pursue my own passion, by building a world out of logic and code, had become a traitor to that legacy. My eyes fell on a box in the corner of the room, where I kept my most precious things. I reached inside and pulled out the small framed programming award from high school. My father had framed it himself, with a simple, dark wood that he said looked distinguished. I traced the glass with my fingertip. To my mother and brother, this piece of paper wasn't an achievement. It was a declaration of war. It was proof that I had chosen a different story, a different language, and for that I had been exiled from theirs. The cold I felt wasn't just from a single night of cruelty. It was the accumulated frost of a lifetime of being told, in 1,000 quiet ways, that my light was an offense. The news that my father was gone came to me a week after that Christmas Eve, not from my mother or brother, but through Chloe's gentle, heartbroken voice over the phone. They hadn't even called me. The omission was a brutal confirmation of my exile. At the funeral, I was a ghost. I stood in the back row of the quiet, sterile room, an anonymous mourner at my own father's service. My mother, Cordelia, stood beside Dashiell, a veil of grief hiding her face, but I knew she wouldn't look at me. She never did. When I moved forward, wanting one last touch, one connection to his world, I reached for a worn volume of poetry they had placed on the lectern. But before my fingers could graze the leather spine, Dashiell's hand shot out and swatted mine away. A cold, silent rejection. After the service, as people milled about offering hollow condolences, An older nurse with kind eyes sought me out. She pressed a crumpled piece of paper into my palm. "Your father," she whispered, her voice full of pity. "He tried to write this for you before he went." Under the dim funeral home lights, I unfolded the paper. 3 words scrawled in a shaky, dying hand. "Live, Nellie, live." It was the only inheritance I received, the only command. And as I walked out of that cemetery, leaving everything I had ever known behind, it became my only mission. I turned my grief into fuel. The pain was a furnace, and I shoveled every ounce of it into my work. I became a machine, a creature of pure, relentless momentum. My life in Cambridge became a frantic montage of survival. Days were spent in the soaring abstract halls of MIT's data center, absorbing lectures on machine learning and computational theory. Nights were for earning my existence. I'd take the T to Beacon Hill, tutoring calculus to the privileged children of wealthy families in their immaculate brownstones. Weekends were a blur of freelance coding projects, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I built small applications for clients who never saw my face. I lived on black coffee from Dunkin' and cheap, day-old bagels from a 24-hour convenience store. It was a lonely, exhausting orbit. In the quiet moments, the silence was the loudest sound. I'd see my classmates huddled in the common rooms, opening care packages from home filled with cookies and warm socks. I'd overhear their FaceTime calls with parents, their laughter echoing down the hallways. A sharp, piercing pang of self-pity would hit me then, a longing so intense it felt like a physical ache. I was utterly alone, but then my hand would find the worn, folded piece of paper in my pocket. "Live, Nellie." I would read the words and the self-pity would recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. To live meant to survive. To survive meant to win. I would turn back to my screen, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face in the dark room, and I would type. The only place I felt I was truly breathing was inside the laboratory, at the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, C-SAIL. There, amidst the hum of servers and the quiet scratching of styluses on tablets, I found a strange kind of peace. The world of human emotion was a chaotic, painful mess, but the world of algorithms was pure, elegant logic. There was an answer for everything, a solution waiting to be found. My thesis project became my sanctuary. I poured everything I was, the girl who loved books and the woman who mastered code, into a single, ambitious idea, an AI that could analyze and understand narrative structures in literature. I was teaching a machine to find the soul in a story. It was the perfect fusion of my two worlds, a bridge I was building all by myself. I called it Storyweaver. In this world, the one I was creating from scratch, I belonged. It was my kingdom, and no one could banish me from it. This was how I would honor my father's last wish. This was how I would live. One late afternoon, as the winter sun cast long shadows across the campus, I was packing up, my body aching with fatigue. "Jules!" The voice stopped me in the hallway. It was Professor Alastair Miller, a legend in the AI field, a man whose papers I had studied with reverence. He was looking at me over the top of his thick-framed glasses, a copy of my thesis proposal in his hand. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I've read your proposal," he said, his tone measured. "It's ambitious. Some might even say it's insane." He paused, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "I like it." He looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, truly seen. Not as a problem, not as a disappointment, but as a mind with potential. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," he continued, his voice cutting through the fog of my exhaustion. "We need to talk about the future of this insanity." For the first time since that terrible Christmas Eve, for the first time since the cold had settled deep within my soul, a tiny, unfamiliar flicker of warmth ignited inside me. It wasn't a fire, not yet, but it was a spark, a single fragile spark of hope. A door I never knew existed had just creaked open. The next morning, I stood nervously outside Professor Miller's office. It felt like standing on a precipice, inside, surrounded by shelves overflowing with books and small, intricate robot models. He gestured for me to sit. He didn't waste time. He looked at me, his eyes sharp but kind, and said the words that would alter the course of my life. "Your talent isn't just about code, kid," he said, his voice gentle. "You have an ability to see the story inside the data. That's a gift. Don't you ever let it go." It was more than praise. It was validation. It was the first time someone of his stature had looked at my two mismatched worlds, literature and logic, and seen not a contradiction but a unique strength. He asked me about my background, and for some reason I told him everything. I spoke of the bookstore, of my father, of the constant, quiet battle to justify my own existence. He listened without judgment, his gaze unwavering, offering only understanding. Then he did something extraordinary. He shared a piece of himself. He told me about his own childhood in Pittsburgh, how his father, a steel mill worker, couldn't understand why his son wanted to study, things that seemed to exist only up in the clouds. He spoke of the struggle to bridge that gap, the loneliness of forging a new path. In that moment, he wasn't just a legendary professor, he was a kindred spirit. The empathy from this near stranger was a powerful balm, healing a part of the wound my own family had inflicted. I walked out of his office that day feeling taller, my path forward suddenly illuminated. That light grew brighter. As Thanksgiving approached, I was resigned to spending it alone, in a nearly empty dorm, the silence a stark reminder of my isolation. But Chloe wouldn't have it. With her typical Boston Irish force of will, she practically dragged me onto the T and took me home with her to South Boston. I stepped into a world of vibrant, happy chaos. Her family's home was loud and crowded, filled with the rich, savory scent of roasting turkey and the sweet aroma of pumpkin pie. A dozen conversations seemed to be happening at once. Uncles argued passionately about the Patriots, cousins chased each other through the living room, and Chloe's mother presided over it all with a warm, commanding smile. It was the first time I had ever experienced the genuine, unconditional warmth of a family holiday. Later, as I was helping clear the table, Chloe's father, a retired firefighter with the kind, crinkling eyes, put a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder. "There's always a place for you here, Nellie," he said simply. The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. I had to excuse myself, rushing to the small bathroom down the hall, where I leaned against the door and finally let the tears fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a profound, aching gratitude for what I was being given, and a deep, sorrowful recognition of what I'd never had. Buoyed by this newfound support system, I decided to make one last attempt. On the first anniversary of my father's death, clutching a sliver of hope that a year might have softened them, I called home. The phone rang and rang, unanswered. The silence was its own kind of answer, but the final verdict arrived that evening in my inbox. An email from Dashiell. The subject line was a punch to the gut. "Stop bothering us." I opened it, my hand trembling. It was a vicious, self-pitying indictment. He wrote that my selfish ambition had created so much stress that it led to the bookstore's final collapse after Dad's death. He called me a disgrace to the Jules name. He twisted my success at MIT into an act of abandonment. The email ended with a line of pure, unadulterated venom. "You have your world now. Leave us alone with the ashes you left behind." I read the words and then I read them again. This time I didn't cry. I didn't feel the familiar sting of hurt. I felt nothing, just a terrifying, serene calm. The kind of calm that comes when the absolute worst has happened, and you're still standing. I had offered them one last chance to be a family, and they had used it to pour poison into my oldest wounds. I had given them enough of my life. I opened the Contacts app on my phone. My thumb hovered over the name Mom, then scrolled to Dashiell. My finger trembled slightly, a final vestigial tremor of the girl I used to be. Then I pressed block. I did the same for my mother's number. I went back to my inbox, selected his email, and without a moment's hesitation, I deleted it. It felt like excising a tumor, a clean, necessary cut. That night, I walked to the edge of the Charles River. The city lights glittered on the dark, flowing water. I stood there for a long time, the cold air sharp in my lungs. I had been adrift, but now I had a heading. I made a silent vow to the city, to the memory of my father, and to myself. From now on, I would only move forward. The past was dead. I would be the one to bury it. The vow I made by the Charles River became the blueprint for my new life. It wasn't a promise of revenge, but a declaration of existence. I graduated from MIT summa cum laude, a distinction earned through 1,000 sleepless nights. Professor Miller, who had become a steadfast mentor, wasn't just at my graduation. He wrote the recommendation that opened the next door, a coveted spot in Mass Challenge, one of Boston's top tech incubators. It was the big leagues. Armed with a formidable student loan that felt like a mountain on my back, and the last of my meager savings, I rented a small corner office in a shared workspace in the Innovation District. It was just me and two brilliant, loyal friends from MIT, Liam and Maya, who believed in my insane idea as much as I did. We were ready to build an empire from nothing. I named the company Storyweaver AI. The name was a quiet tribute, a personal treaty between my two halves. It honored the literary legacy of my father, the world of worn spines and endless imagination, while firmly planting my flag in the technological world I had chosen. It was my story to weave now, with threads of code and logic. Our first office was the classic startup cliché, a scene straight out of a movie about ambitious 20-somethings. We had 3 mismatched desks rescued from a university surplus sale, a whiteboard covered in a frantic spiderweb of equations and flowcharts, and a veritable mountain of instant ramen noodle cups in the corner. We were the architects of a new world, and our diet consisted of cheap coffee, determination, and the unwavering belief that our insane idea could actually work. The days were grueling, 18-hour marathons that bled into one another. We wrote code until our eyes burned and the letters on the screen blurred into an unreadable mess. We debated algorithms until our voices were hoarse and pushed ourselves past every conceivable limit of exhaustion. There were nights, however, when the relentless pressure became unbearable. The exhaustion was so profound, it gave way to a creeping, venomous doubt that whispered ugly things in the dead of night. One such night slumped over my keyboard at 3 a.m. The weight of it all, the loans, the responsibility to my friends, the sheer audacity of what we were trying to do, felt like it was going to crush me. I was about to give in, to close the laptop and admit defeat when I randomly clicked on a recommended video, a TED Talk by Brené Brown. I watched, mesmerized, as she spoke with such clarity and conviction about the power of vulnerability. Then she said the words that rewired my entire understanding of my own pain. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's our most accurate measure of courage. In that silent pre-dawn moment, something inside me shifted. A profound realization washed over me, like a light flooding a dark room. All the pain, the rejection from my family, the feeling of being broken and soulless. It wasn't a liability to be hidden away in shame. It was my greatest asset. It was my source code. I was a Storyweaver because I knew intimately and painfully what a broken story felt like. My wound wasn't a weakness. It was the very lens through which I could see how to build a tool to help others tell their own stories. From that moment on, I wasn't just building a company to survive. I was fulfilling a purpose. The journey was still a brutal uphill climb. We faced a relentless barrage of setbacks. Our most elegant algorithms would crash spectacularly at the most critical moments. Our funds dwindled to terrifyingly low levels, the numbers in our bank account shrinking with each passing day. The initial rejection letters from venture capitalists were sharp and dismissive, each one a small paper cut to our already fragile morale. There were weeks when I secretly took on extra freelance coding gigs, working through the night after my 18-hour day at the office, just to make sure I could pay Liam and Maya. I couldn't bear the thought of failing them too. But then we started to win. The victories were small, almost microscopic at first, but they felt monumental. Our first real customer, an independent author from Oregon, who used our software to outline her sprawling fantasy novel. Then a small independent publishing house in Vermont that signed up for a trial subscription. Each small win was like lighting a candle in the oppressive darkness, a tiny flickering flame that kept our bigger fire from going out. Chloe became our unofficial morale officer, a force of nature who would show up unannounced with a stack of pizzas from Regina Pizzeria and refuse to leave until we all stopped working for an hour. Her loud, practical laughter, a welcome antidote to our suffocating stress. After a year of relentless, back-breaking work, our beta version of Storyweaver AI was complete, and it started to make noise. Whispers in the Boston tech community turned into a legitimate buzz. We were invited to present at Mass Challenge's annual Demo Day, a high-stakes event in front of hundreds of angel investors and venture capitalists. This was our shot, our one chance to go from ramen noodles to a real future. The night before the presentation, I stood alone in our small, quiet office, looking out the window at the glittering expanse of the Boston skyline. The city lights twinkled like a million distant promises. My mind flashed back to that cold, bitter Christmas Eve, to the girl who was cast out into the snow, deemed worthless. I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was a CEO, a founder, an architect of my own destiny. I took a deep, steadying breath, the air in the silent office electric with anticipation. I closed my eyes, whispered a silent thank you to my father, and squared my shoulders. The stage was waiting, and I was ready to tell my story. 5 years of relentless work, of pouring my soul into Storyweaver AI, had transformed my world. The company that started with ramen noodles and desperation was now a resounding success. My name, Nellie Jules, was on the cover of Forbes, smiling out from their 30 Under 30 issue. Our company was valued at nearly $100 million. I had traded my cramped dorm room for a sprawling penthouse apartment in Boston's Seaport District, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the harbor. I had built a life of peace, of control, of quiet satisfaction. One Tuesday morning, I was enjoying that peace. I sat by the window, a warm mug of coffee in my hands, scrolling through my morning emails. The harbor was calm, the sky a brilliant blue, and then I saw it. An email from a name I thought I had permanently deleted from my life. Dashiell Jules. My heart gave a hard, uncomfortable thud against my ribs. It was an involuntary physical reaction, a body remembering a threat before the mind could process it. For 5 years, there had been nothing. Absolute silence. Why now? I clicked it open, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The tone of the email was nauseatingly friendly. A thick syrup of false sentimentality. He congratulated me on my success, saying he'd stumbled across the Forbes article. He wrote about how he missed the old days, and that after all, family is still family. He reminisced about childhood moments that I knew for a fact had never happened, but it was one sentence that made a wave of pure revulsion wash over me. I always knew you had a special mind, Nellie. I always believed in you. The lie was so audacious, so shameless, it took my breath away. It was a brutal act of gaslighting, an attempt to rewrite history so completely that it erased every scar he had inflicted. He who had called my dreams soulless. He who had stood by as our mother accused me of killing our father. He always believed in me. The email ended with a casual, predatory suggestion. We should get coffee sometime, catch up, reconnect. I felt sick. My carefully constructed peace was shattered. The past wasn't dead, it was just dormant, and it had smelled my success. I forwarded the email to my personal laptop and brought it with me to my weekly therapy session. Dr. Ann, my therapist, had a calm, steady presence that had helped me rebuild my foundations. She read the email on my screen, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me. "Nellie," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "this is not an apology, it's a summons." She pointed to the screen. He doesn't acknowledge any wrongdoing. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He's attempting to normalize the relationship as if the rupture never happened. This is a classic love-bombing tactic. He sees your success, Nellie, not you. Her words were like a splash of cold water, cutting through the emotional fog. She was right. This wasn't about family. It was about opportunity. Dashiell wasn't reaching out to his sister. He was making a business inquiry, cloaked in the language of familial love. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For now, nothing," Dr. Ann advised. "You don't have enough information. You are reacting to the ghost of your brother, not the man he is today. Before you respond, you need facts. You need the truth." I left her office with a cold, clear sense of purpose. I couldn't trust a single word that came from him or from my mother. I needed the truth, but not their version of it. I needed cold, hard, emotionless data. The naive 19-year-old girl who pleaded for her family's approval was long gone. In her place was a CEO, and a CEO uses her resources. That afternoon, back in the quiet sanctuary of my penthouse, I picked up my phone. I didn't call Dashiell. I called my company's corporate lawyer. "Mark, it's Nellie," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I need a recommendation, the best private investigator in Boston. No questions asked, just the best." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Of course, Nellie, I have a name for you." After I hung up, I stood by the window, looking out at the harbor again. The beautiful, peaceful view now felt different. It was my fortress, and its walls had just been breached. I wonder if you've ever felt that. That chilling realization that someone you cut out of your life, for your own sanity, is trying to claw their way back in. Not because they've changed, but because you have. It was a violation. I made the call to the investigator. My instructions were simple and absolute. I want to know everything about Dashiell and Cordelia Jules for the past 5 years, I said into the phone, my voice as cold and clear as the glass of my window. Finances, employment, associates, debts, everything. It was a cold, calculated decision, a business decision. I was no longer just protecting my heart, which had taken years of painstaking work to heal. I was protecting my empire, and I would use every weapon in my arsenal to do it. I chose the venue with deliberate, piercing irony, the Boston Athenaeum, a private library on Beacon Hill, a hushed, sacred temple of knowledge and truth, its air thick with the scent of old leather and polished wood. It was the perfect stage for the final act. They arrived looking worn down by life, the years of quiet struggle etched onto their faces. Dashiell wore a slightly too tight blazer, a poor imitation of success, while my mother, Cordelia, clutched her purse like a shield. The polite, awkward greetings were brief. Dashiell, clearly eager to get to the point, wasted no time. He launched into a rambling, grandiose pitch for his new startup idea, a digital art gallery platform. It was a poorly conceived plan, full of buzzwords and lacking any real substance. He concluded his presentation with a breathtakingly arrogant request. "So," he said, leaning forward with a patronizing smile, "I'll need $500,000 to get it off the ground. Think of it, Nellie. This is your chance to invest in real art, in the family legacy, something with a soul instead of just code." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting his words echo in the hallowed space. I listened to his entire pitch without a single interruption, my expression unreadable. When he finally finished, a hopeful, greedy glint in his eye, I didn't address his proposal. I didn't speak of money or art. I just asked him one simple question, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "What did you say to me on Christmas Eve 5 years ago?" Dashiell froze. A flicker of confusion, then panic, crossed his face. "Nellie, that's ancient history," he stammered, attempting a dismissive wave of his hand. "I want to hear it," I cut in, my voice unwavering. "From your own mouth, the exact words." My mother tried to intervene, her voice a nervous flutter. "Nellie, darling, let's not—" I held up a hand, a sharp, definitive gesture that stopped her mid-sentence. "Mom," I said, my gaze locked on my brother. "I am not speaking to you, I am speaking to Dashiell." The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. Dashiell squirmed under my relentless stare. He looked to our mother for rescue, but found none. Trapped, he finally mumbled the words, the venom of that night diluted by shame and time, that your money was as soulless as you are. "Thank you," I said, a chilling politeness in my tone. I calmly reached into my briefcase and pulled out my tablet, placing it on the antique table between us. I swiped the screen on. "You also said in your email that you always believed in me. So please explain this." I turned the screen toward them. There, in stark black and white, was the email he had sent me on the anniversary of our father's death. The one with the subject line, "Stop bothering us." I watched the color drain from his face. "And this," I said, swiping to the next file, "is the report from my private investigator." I let them see the heading, then began to recite the facts, my voice a steady, emotionless monotone. "The bookstore, Jules & Sons, wasn't lost because of a bad economy. It was sold to pay off over $50,000 of your gambling debts, Dashiell. Debts you accrued playing online poker. I didn't look at him, but I could feel his world crumbling. You are not an art consultant. You are currently employed as a sales associate at a Best Buy in Saugus. I finally lifted my eyes from the tablet and looked directly at my mother. "And Mom," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but losing none of its steel. "I know about your cancer diagnosis, and I also know that your insurance plan doesn't cover the best immunotherapy treatment." They were both completely silent, statues carved from shock and shame. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. This was the moment, the secret weapon. The miraculous grant from the New England Medical Benevolence Fund that has been covering all of your out-of-pocket expenses for the last 6 months, I continued, my voice perfectly even. I established that fund. It was my money. I used those soulless dollars to save your life. That was the final blow. The truth detonated in the quiet library. Cordelia broke. A choked guttural sob escaped her lips, the sound of a lifetime of self-deception, shattering all at once. She crumpled in her chair, weeping with a raw, agonizing shame. Dashiell, in his panic, did the one thing I never could have predicted. He didn't apologize. He didn't show a flicker of remorse. He turned on our weeping mother, his face twisted in a mask of childish rage. "This is your fault," he screamed, his voice a pathetic, cracking whine. "It's all your fault. You always told me I was special. You made me believe I didn't have to try." I had seen enough. I calmly stood up, sliding my tablet back into its leather case. The battle was over. I had won. "Our meeting is concluded," I announced to the wreckage before me. "Do not contact me again until I give you permission." I turned my back on them and walked away, my footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. I didn't look back. I left them there, alone in the temple of truth, to choke on the ashes of their own making. Leaving the Boston Athenaeum, I expected to feel a surge of triumphant release. I had won. I had meticulously prepared, presented my case, detonated the truth, and walked away from the blast zone unscathed. But as I settled into the quiet, leather-scented interior of my car, the adrenaline began to fade, and what rushed in to fill the void wasn't elation. It was a profound, hollow exhaustion. It settled deep in my bones, a leaden weariness that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. It was the soul-deep fatigue that comes after a long, brutal war. I had emerged victorious, but the cost of victory was the final, undeniable, cold stone confirmation that the family I had once cherished was a phantom, a story I had told myself to survive. I drove aimlessly through the city streets, the traffic and noise of a bustling afternoon, a distant, muffled hum. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but I wasn't really going anywhere, just moving through a world that suddenly felt alien and out of focus. Eventually, I found myself pulling over on a quiet street alongside the Esplanade, the long, graceful park that hugs the bank of the Charles River. This was where my father used to bring me for walks, where he'd point out the different sailboats and tell me their stories. Now I got out and sat on a cold, empty bench, watching the vibrant life of the city unfold before me as if through a thick pane of glass. Joggers in brightly colored athletic gear pounded the pavement, their breath pluming in the crisp air, their faces set with determination. Young couples walked their dogs, laughing and leaning into each other, sharing secrets and futures. A mother pushed a stroller, cooing at the baby bundled inside. I watched them all, these small, ordinary portraits of connection and normalcy, and I felt like a ghost. I was an invisible observer, a visitor from another dimension, looking in on a world I wasn't part of. I had fought a silent, solitary battle that no one else knew existed, and now, in the quiet aftermath, I had to face the aftershock alone. The victory felt like a lonely, barren island. A few days later, the inevitable barrage began. A series of desperate, rambling emails from Dashiell flooded my inbox, each subject line more frantic than the last. They were a pathetic, toxic cocktail of self-pity, blame, and half-formed apologies that quickly curdled back into accusation. I scanned the first few lines of one, "How could you do this to your own family?" and felt nothing but a profound sense of detachment. I deleted the rest without reading them. I was done listening to his noise. Instead, I had my lawyer draft a single, formal response. The email was concise and clinical, stripped of all emotion. It stated that I would not, under any circumstances, be investing in his or any other business venture. However, recognizing a sliver of shared DNA, I was willing to provide him with a modest stipend for 6 months under 2 strict, non-negotiable conditions. He had to enroll in and consistently attend therapy for his gambling addiction, providing proof of attendance, and he had to find and maintain steady employment. At the end of the 6-month period, all financial support would cease permanently. It wasn't an act of charity, it was an exit strategy, a final formal opportunity for him to save himself. My new phone number was not provided. The boundary was drawn in concrete, reinforced with steel. That afternoon, I felt a pull toward another place of quiet reflection. I drove to Mount Auburn Cemetery, a beautiful, sprawling landscape of rolling hills, ancient trees, and quiet dignity. I found my father's grave tucked away in a peaceful corner. The headstone was simple granite, just his name, Arthur Jules, and a single quote he had loved from the Gospel of John. In my father's house are many mansions. I didn't cry. The time for tears was long past. I just stood there, the cool autumn breeze rustling the golden leaves around me, and I talked to him in the silence of my mind. I told him everything, about Storyweaver, about the penthouse overlooking the harbor, about the confrontation at the Athenaeum. I told him how I had used his memory as a compass. "I lived, Dad," I whispered to the silent stone, my voice barely disturbing the sacred air. "I tried to live a great life. I hope you're proud." As I stood there, a gentle wind swept through the trees, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and damp soil, and in that moment, I felt a strange, profound sense of peace wash over me, as if he were there, listening, his silent presence, a warm, comforting approval. I had come to understand what real forgiveness meant. It wasn't about excusing their actions. It was about releasing myself from the crushing weight of their judgment. In the quiet of the cemetery, I was forgiving them, not for their sake, but for mine. I was setting myself free. A week later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. My first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was Dashiell trying another angle. But something made me hesitate. I pressed play. A woman's voice, fragile and broken by sobs, filled the silence of my apartment. "Nellie, it's Mom." A long, shaky pause, punctuated by a hitched breath. "You don't have to call back. I wanted to say, I'm sorry." The words were heavy, each one a struggle, pulled from a place of deep shame. For everything, I was wrong. I was so wrong to choose silence instead of protecting you. I am so sorry. My daughter. 2 words I hadn't heard from her lips in what felt like a lifetime. They hung in the air, weighted with years of pain and a flicker of something I couldn't yet name. I didn't respond, I didn't call back, but I didn't delete the message either. I simply saved it. It sat there on my phone, not as an absolution, but as a single fragile seed planted in the scorched earth of our past. A tiny, uncertain possibility for a different kind of future. My mother's voicemail sat on my phone for weeks, a digital ghost I couldn't bring myself to delete. It wasn't forgiveness she was asking for, not yet. It was an opening, and after many long sessions with Dr. Ann, exploring the terrain of my own cautious heart, I realized that true peace might not come from building higher walls, but from building a gate, one that only I controlled. I was doing this for me, for the quiet space in my own soul. I decided to open that gate just a crack. I arranged to meet my mother at a neutral coffee shop in Brookline. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile. I laid out my terms on the table between us, my voice calm and firm. "I will continue to fund your medical care," I began, looking her directly in the eye. "And I will buy you a small, comfortable condo." I was thinking of a place in Jamaica Plain, near the park and the community arts center. I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "But there are conditions. We will attend family therapy together with Dr. Ann." "This isn't a punishment, Mom. It's the only road back to a conversation." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't try to argue or make excuses. She simply looked at me, her gaze filled with a weary acceptance, and nodded. "Okay, Nellie," she whispered. "Okay." The first therapy sessions were excruciating. They were landscapes of awkward silence, punctuated by my mother's old, familiar refrains of how difficult Dashiell's life had been. But Dr. Ann was a masterful guide. She gently but relentlessly steered us away from the well-worn paths of blame and into the uncharted territory of truth. Slowly, painfully, the layers began to peel back. For the first time, my mother admitted her all-consuming fear of Dashiell failing, of his artistic dreams crumbling into nothing. She confessed how that fear had blinded her, making her see my independence not as a strength, but as a judgment on his weakness. In turn, I learned how to articulate my own pain without using anger as a shield. I spoke of the telescope, the scholarship dinner, the crushing weight of being the strong one who was never allowed to need anything. It was a slow, painful excavation of our shared history, but it was necessary. And then, a year after our showdown at the Athenaeum, something remarkable happened. Dashiell, who had been honoring the terms of my financial support, had completed his therapy program. The private investigator's reports, which I still quietly commissioned, confirmed he was holding a steady, if modest, job at a public library in a suburb west of the city. On Christmas, a small, carefully wrapped package arrived at my office. Inside, there was no expensive gift meant to impress me. It was an old, well-worn book, its spine softened with age. It was a first edition of Thoreau's Walden, my father's favorite book, the very copy I thought had been lost forever when the bookstore was sold. Tucked inside was a handwritten letter on simple, plain paper. His handwriting, once a self-important scrawl, was now neat, deliberate. "Nellie," it read, "I'm sorry for everything. There are no excuses. We were wrong. You deserved better." That was it. No justifications, no self-pity. Just the simple, unvarnished truth. I held the book to my chest, its familiar weight a bridge to a past I thought was gone forever. A few weeks later, I invited my mother to my apartment for dinner. It was the first time she had set foot in my world, the world I had built for myself. She looked around the spacious, light-filled living room, her eyes wide. When she saw the framed photograph of my father, placed prominently on the main bookshelf, she stopped. She reached out and lightly touched the glass, and her composure finally broke. A soft, quiet stream of tears ran down her cheeks. We ate a simple meal. We talked about her painting class at the Jamaica Plain Arts Center, a passion she had abandoned when she married my father and was now rediscovering. The conversation was stilted at times, but it was real. As she was getting ready to leave, standing by the door in a moment of awkward hesitation, I did something that surprised us both. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. The hug was brief, a little stiff, but it was genuine. I could feel the frailty of her shoulders, the years of unspoken words between us. She held on for a second, a small, grateful sigh escaping her. "Thank you, Nellie," she whispered into my shoulder. I just nodded, pulling back. "It's not everything, Mom," I said, my voice soft but clear. "But it's a start." As she left, my eyes fell on the copy of Walden sitting on my coffee table. It was more than a book, it was a peace treaty. A quiet acknowledgement that our family's story, so broken and painful, was finally being woven back together, one fragile, honest thread at a time. The following spring, I stood on a small stage in a bustling community center in Roxbury, a neighborhood in Boston vibrant with life and energy. The room was filled with the excited chatter of children. This was the launch of the Arthur Jules Foundation, a nonprofit funded entirely by Storyweaver AI. Our mission was simple: to provide free coding and storytelling workshops for kids in low-income neighborhoods. I looked out at the sea of eager young faces, their eyes bright with curiosity, ready to write their first lines of code. I gripped the podium, my heart full. "My father, Arthur, believed that everyone has a story worth telling," I said, my voice clear and steady. He built his life around that belief, and today, technology can be the most powerful pen imaginable. We're here to hand that pen to each and every one of you. As the room erupted in applause, my gaze found two figures in the back row: my mother, Cordelia, and my brother, Dashiell. They were clapping softly, not seeking attention, their faces filled with a quiet, genuine pride. They weren't the villains of my story anymore, nor were they the heroes. They were simply part of this new legacy, redefined and rebuilt, witnesses to a new chapter. They had no hand in writing, but were now privileged to read. My own story had a new chapter, too. His name was Leo. He was an architect, a man who built things that were beautiful and made to last. He loved me not in spite of my scars, but because of them. He said they were the blueprint of the strong, resilient woman he admired. He never tried to fix me. He just loved all the complex, interlocking pieces that made me who I was. We would take long walks along the Charles River, the same path I had walked in my loneliest moments. But now I wasn't alone. I was holding the hand of a man who was also building his own world, and we had decided to build a part of it together. The silence between us was comfortable, a shared peace that needed no words. That Thanksgiving, my penthouse apartment, once a silent fortress of solitude, was filled with the warm, chaotic symphony of laughter. It was a beautiful, motley crew. Chloe was there, of course, her boisterous Irish-American family in tow, filling the space with loud jokes and easy affection. My loyal teammates from Storyweaver, Liam and Maya, were debating nerdy topics in a corner. And, seated at my table, were my mother and Dashiell. We were not a perfect picture postcard family. We were a mosaic, a collection of broken people who were learning, awkwardly but sincerely. how to piece ourselves back together. As I looked around the room, I saw Dashiell helping Leo clear the plates from the table, a simple act of service I never would have imagined years ago. I saw my mother showing Chloe the new watercolors she had painted, her face alive with a passion I thought was long extinguished. And in that moment, I realized this was it. This was family. Not the one you are born into, but the one you build. A family built on hard truths, conditional forgiveness, and a tremendous amount of effort from everyone involved. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I stood alone by the vast window, looking out at the familiar, glittering lights of the city across the river. In my hands, I held the worn copy of Walden that Dashiell had given me. I traced the faded gold lettering on the spine, a tangible link to my father's spirit. I had kept my promise to him. I had lived. I hadn't just survived. I had thrived. I had built a life more vibrant and meaningful than I could have ever imagined. And standing there, in the quiet of my self-made sanctuary, I finally understood what true wealth was. It wasn't the number in a bank account or the valuation of a company. It was the reclaimed power to define my own family. It was the courage to offer a second chance on my own terms. It was the strength to transform my deepest wounds into a source of healing for others. And most importantly, it was the quiet, unshakable peace of having built a place in the world where I wasn't just welcomed, but was truly valued, respected, and loved, first and foremost by myself. The promise I made in the snow on the bank of the Charles River was at long last fulfilled. My story, the one that began in a cold bookstore, has found its peaceful chapter. But as I share this with you, I know that for so many of us, the story is still being written. Perhaps you've had to draw your own difficult boundaries or build a chosen family from the ground up when the one you were given fell apart. Your journey of resilience is powerful, and it deserves to be honored. If you feel comfortable, share a piece of that journey in the comments below. This channel Chosen Revenge is a dedicated space for these stories of strength and new beginnings. Please subscribe to hear more, and always know you are not alone.